Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ches of Masechta Sheqalim, Daf 8. The Daf really starts off with a continuation of what we were discussing yesterday. With we had said that the Trumas Halishka is 3 times a year, and then we said that that's also kind of connected to when we do Meiser Behema, separating a tenth. Basically what you do is you take all your flock and you walk it and you hold like a stick, and every 10th one you tap with the stick, and that one becomes a korban. So you also do Meiser Behema around those times of year. And then we get to a new Mishnah towards the bottom of Amud Aleph. And let's get started here. So we are going to start in Daf Zayin Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Vehein Granos v'chulei. Rabbi Yochanan Mipnei Shein Pirkei Leda. So Rabbi Yochanan says that the reason why we do Meiser Behema at the times listed in the Mishnah is because those are the times that they give birth. So around the times that the animals give birth, that's when we chop around and separate the Meiser from the flocks. That's very interesting. That is so that the animals should be available for the people going to be Ola Regel, because the merchants, the people in Yerushalayim, would be selling the animals, and there was a big need, demand for meat during the Shalosh Regalim, because people had different korbanos that they had to offer, because Pashit, people needed to eat. Right, they needed meat around Stam. So therefore, in order to make sure that there would be enough meat for everybody, the merchants would dafka hold off doing Meiser Behema until like around the Shalosh Regalim, and then they would do Meiser Behema so that they wouldn't eat/sell or whatever, so they would make sure, because they wouldn't want to use their flock until Meiser was separated. So by delaying separating Meiser until around the times of Shalosh Regalim, they would basically artificially make sure that they had enough supply for the demand that was going to be. Now, I think that you're allowed to eat I don't think that there's tevel in quite the same way that there is with like grain, that you mamish are not allowed to eat the grain until you separate Meiser. I don't think that that's the case by animals. I don't think so. I think that it was just voluntary, that the merchants, in order to make sure that they would have enough supply, they would artificially they would prefer not to use their, eat, sell, whatever, their flock until they separate Meiser, and they would just push off that Meiser until around the Shalosh Regalim, so that they would, kind of make sure that they have enough supply. Amr Yudin Shelo Yavo Lide Bal Ta'acher, so you don't come to the prohibition of do not delay your korbanos. You don't want to delay your korbanos, so therefore, so as not to delay your korbanos, before the Shalosh Regalim, they would separate Meiser Behema, and they would bring the animals to Jerusalem and offer them as korbanos. Rabbi Yosa kola masha tivlo over beval te'acher. Okay, anybody who pushes off his tevel, I believe his tevel being if he doesn't take Meiser Behema, so then he is violating bal te'acher. Talmud Tanina, we learned in the Mishnah of Meir. Omer says of Meir be'echod be'elul Rosh Hashanah l'Meiser Behema. The Reb Meir says that on the first of Elul is the Rosh Hashanah l'gabi Meiser Behema. Kilo, the first of Elul is the cutoff. That any animal born before Elul is tithed with the previous year's animals, and any animal born after Elul is tithed with the following year's animals. Rabbi Elazar of Reb Shimon Omrim be'echod b'Tishrei, whereas Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon say that the cutoff is the first of Tishrei. Okay. Benazai Omer says Benazai ha'eluliim misasim b'fnei atzman, that what you do, says Benazai, that actually any of the animals that are born in Elul, you treat them as their own separate thing. So Kilu, any animal born before Elul is going to be tithed with the previous year. Any animal born after Elul is going to be tithed with the next year, and any animal born in Elul is tithed with other animals born in Elul. Reb Chuna, time with Reb Meir. So it says Reb Chuna, the reason why Reb Meir says that the cutoff is the first of Elul is because Arkan hin mismatzos leiled min hayishanos, mikan ve'elach hin maschilos leiled min hachadashos. So the answer is because any animal born before Elul was conceived before Nisan. So really what's important is the beginning of the year is Nisan. So we want animals that were conceived this year. And therefore any animal born before Elul was conceived before Nisan, i.e. in last year, and any animal born after Elul was conceived in the current year, and that is why it will be, tied with the animals from the next, that's why that's the cutoff basically. Reb Yosa bar Bun b'shem Rav Chuna Talmud Reb Elazar Reb Shimon is because the pasuk says Lav Shukarim Atzon, that they wore the clothing of the tzon. I think it refers to, I believe, the sheep getting pregnant. I think Ela Bakiros. Those are the animals that are born early. Va'amakim Yatvu bar Elo Afelos. Those are the animals that are born later. The animals that are born earlier would be in before Elul. The animals that are born later would be during Elul. Yisu'o af yashiru, and then they all sing together. Ve'elu nichnasin ladir le'saser, and then all of them you take the meiser together. So therefore, any of the animals born before Elul, as well as the animals born during Elul, they're all going to take meiser all together. So after Elul, i.e. in Tishrei. So that is why Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say that the cutoff is Tishrei, so you could do meiser behema together with all of the animals, including the ones born in Elul. Fine. Omer ben Azai, it says ben Azai hol ve'elu omim kach, since these say that the cutoff, since Reb Meir says the cutoff is Elul, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say the cutoff is Tishrei. So Yehua Elulim misasim b'fnei atzman. Therefore, the animals born in Elul should just be treated on their own, and any animal born in Elul will be tied with other animals born in Elul. And any animals born before Elul are from the previous year, and after Elul are from the next year. HaKetzad, how is this? Nolad lo behei be'av. Nolad lo hei be'av. If 5 animals were born in Av, behei be'elul, and 5 were born in Elul, behei be'tishrei, and 5 were born in Tishrei, ein mitzdarfin, none of them will join together, because the ones in Av will go from the previous year, the ones in Tishrei will be from the next year, and the ones in Elul are going to be on their own. Nolad lo hei be'tishrei, behei be'av. Now, if 5 animals were born in Tishrei, i.e. at the beginning of the year, and then all the way at the end of the year, another 5 animals were born in Av. Well, that's all the same year, right? Because the cutoff is Tishrei until essentially Elul, right? Because Ben Azai says that once you get Elul, it's treated on its own. But from Tishrei through Av, that's all considered 1 year. And they're going to be Harei Elim Mitzdarfin, they'll join together for Meiser. Uven Azai Machruya Al Div, period. Frekti Gemara, and this is Geshmak. Everybody listen up. Uven Azai Machruya Al Divrei Tamidav Asa. Is Ben Azai coming to make a compromise between his students? This is super interesting. We're talking about Reb Meir, Reb Shimon, and Reb Elazar, and we're saying that they were students of Ben Azai. Now, generally, I think we assume that Reb Meir, we learned in Masechta Erev in the Ma'asen Daf Yud Gimel that Reb Meir was a student of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, and we're saying that he was also a student of Ben Azai, as well as Reb Shimon and Reb Elazar. These are all students of Rabbi Akiva, and we're saying that they were students of Ben Azai as well. That's super interesting. And then we're saying that Ben Azai, now the Gemara is saying, why would Ben Azai be trying to appease all the opinions of his students? Reb Meir says that the cutoff is Elul. Reb Elazar and Reb Shimon say the cutoff is Tishrei. So now Ben Azai says, okay, so let's try to make everybody happy and we'll say Elul. He's the teacher. He should know the answers. He should be the one to say, no, we're holding like this one, or holding like that. He's not the one who should be trying to make everybody else happy. He's the teacher. He knows. No, you get it? The assumption is the older generation would kind of, the younger generation who would want to make the compromise, I guess. So right? But even just the vibe of it, why would Ben Az, the way okay, we have to make everybody happy. Usually it's not the position of the teacher to kind of figure out how to fit together his students' opinions. It would be the students trying to make sense of the teacher's opinion. So Rabbi Yirmiyah of Rabbi Miyasha b'shem Rabbi Shmuel by Rabbi Yitzchak shekenechu kolea avos ha'olam. Do you hear this? This is just getting better and better. That Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Miyasha said the name of Rabbi Shmuel by Yitzchak, that actually Ben Azai what we're talking about here is a machlokes of the avos ha'olam, the fathers of the world. Umaninu, who are the avos ha'olam? Umaninu avos ha'olam. Tana, Rabbi Yonah, Kumi, Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva. That the avos ha'olam are Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. So geshmak. So actually, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva about if the cutoff is Tishrei or if it's Elul. And Ben Azai was coming to say, okay, since there's machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, that is why we'll say that we'll treat Elul separately. Which is super interesting also, because now we're seeing that Ben Azai was Kilu a shtickle student of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, which is also interesting because Kilu, if Reb Meir and Reb Shimon and Reb Elazar were students of Rabbi Akiva, and they were also students of Ben Azai, so Mistama Ben Azai and Rabbi Akiva were contemporaries, but we're saying that Ben Azai was a student of Rabbi Akiva. Super interesting stuff. Says the Gemara is also Meres Ben Azai Chaver v'Talmud Ayed Rabbi Akiva. That Ben Azai was both a colleague and a student of Rabbi Akiva. Wow. And so he was a colleague, but also he referred to Rabbi Akiva as a teacher, and that's why he made the compromise between the machlokas between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva to try to find, he was like machmir like both of them. In Tema Rabbi Iz Barnosh Omar the Rabbi Ho ve'elu amru kach ve'elu amru kach, right? So kilu we see from this dialogue that we just had that that Ben Azai must have been a friend, a colleague of Rabbi Akiva, because just from the way that Ben Azai says it, since these say this and those say that, if you don't speak to your Rebbe like that, these and that, you say Rebbe says this and Rebbe says that. From the fact it says these and those, so it must be that they were colleagues. Again, in Tamar, if you say Rabbi, that Rabbi, if you wanted to say that Rabbi Akiva was Ben Azai's teacher but not his colleague, he's Barnash, Amar Rabbi, do you have somebody who says to his teacher, oh, ve'elu amukach, ve'elu amukach? No way. So you would say Rebbe says this, Rebbe says that. From the fact he says Elu ve'elu, so it must be that they were colleagues. Reb Avun b'shem Rabbi Yishmael bar Rabbi Yitzchak shama le la minada. Says Reb Avun in the name of Rabbi Yishmael bar Yitzchak that you can infer that they were colleagues from here. Amar le Ben Azai, that Ben Azai says to Rabbi Akiva. It's a Gemara in Bava Basra. He says, Ala chalukin anu mitztairin el shabasa lachlok alenu esashavin. Right, there was a machlokas over there. There were like three machlokas three contexts, and in two of them, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue, and in one of them they were able to say that everyone agrees. And Rabbi Akiva came to say, no, they disagree there as well. To which Ben Azai says, it's difficult enough that there are these two cases where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue. You want to say that they also argue on the one where we say that they agree? This must mean that Ben Azai, while he was a student of Rabbi Akiva, was also a colleague of his, because in Tema Rabbi, because if you say that Ben Azai was only a student of Rabbi Akiva, but not also a colleague, Iz Barnosh Amar the Rabbi Ella Shabasa Lachlok Alenu Esashavin, would a student say to his teacher, what, that you're coming to make an argument in a place where they agree? He wouldn't speak to his teacher like that. He would have more respect, but he felt comfortable as a colleague speaking to him like that. Tamantoninon, we learned in a Mishnah over there in Bechoris, Ko'anuladin me'echod b'tishrei ad chovtes be'elul, hare elu mitzdarfin. So any animals that are born from the 1st of Tishrei until the 29th of Elul, the cutoff being Tishrei essentially, hare elu mitzdarfin, so that's all 1 year. From the first day of Tishrei until the end of Elul is all 1 year. Legabe Meiser Behema, and all the animals from that year you'll do Meiser Behema together, and any animals after that or before that would be part of different years. Chamisha lifnei Rosh Hashanah ve'hei la'achar Rosh Hashanah. If you have 5 animals born before Rosh Hashanah, i.e. before Rosh Chodesh Elul, Tishrei, and 5 born after Tishrei, so ein mitzdarfin, they don't join together for Meiser Behema because they're different years. Hey lifnei agoren ve'ei la'achar agoren. If you have 5 before these times that we listed in the Mishnah that we separate Meiser Behema, right? Let's take Rabbi Akiva's opinion that it's right before Pesach, right before Shavuos, right before Sukkot. So if you have 5 born before each, let's say before Shavuos, and 5 born after Shavuos, that's fine, no big deal, because it's all the same year. Hare Elu Mitzdarfin, they could join together for Meiser Behema. Amar Rabbi Yosa, says Rabbi Yosa, Hada Omeres, this says Meiser Behema lo asu osu lo kichenet velo kishlish. Says Rabbi Yosa that this teaches us that Meiser Behema, that when it comes to Meiser Behema, lo asu also, they didn't make it lo kechenet lo keshlish. What in the Welt? What does that mean? So chenet means that when it comes to chanota, chanota is basically when a fruit begins, with the flower falls off and it starts like bearing fruit. So so the equivalent of an animal would be conception, and shlish is by wheat and by olives and grain, I think, that in order for you to be chayiv in tithes, so it needs to have grown a third already. Right now, we were saying that the cutoff is basically when it's born. So if it's born before Tishrei, so then it's from the previous year. If it's born after Tishrei, it's from the next year. So that means that we're not doing it based on conception. And we're also not saying that you have to wait a certain amount until, because you can't slaughter an animal for a sacrifice immediately when it's born. You have to wait 8 days. So therefore, that would be the equivalent of, let's say, the shlish by the olives and the grain, that you have to wait until they're like a certain level of development. So if we apply that to animals, then you would have to wait a week until you could separate meiser. But we're not saying that. We're saying it's based on when they're born. So in Tamar Kichenet, lesne kola mu'ubar me'echad b'tishrei ad esem v'tishrei be'elul. Because if you say that that it's based on conception, so then it would mean any animal that's been conceived from the beginning of Tishrei until the end of the year. In Tamar Kishlish, and if you say that you have to, when it comes to Meiser Behema, you have to wait until it's the equivalent of the third of the growth by the olives and grains, i.e., that you have to wait until you can offer it as a korban. Well, then lesni kol noladim ad esim v'shnayim be'elu, that the cutoff is really any animals born up until the 22nd of Elul, because any animal born after the 22nd of Elul, when the first of Tishrei comes around, it's not yet going to be 8 days old, and you'd be unable to offer it as a sacrifice, and therefore you wouldn't separate it for Meiser Behema. And therefore, from the fact that we're saying that, we are saying that it's based on when it's born, it must mean that both things are irrelevant. The conception is irrelevant, as well as the being 8 days developed, 8 days old is also irrelevant. From when the time it's born, you can already separate. You can already separate Meiser Behema. Reb Shammai b'shem Reb Bibi Reb Chia kishlish asu osa Reb Shimon dam Reb Shimon mechusar zman nichnas ladir lis aser. So it says Reb Shammai in the name of Reb Bibi Reb Chia, that actually the rabbis hold that there is the concept of a third by Meiser Behema, and that the animals would have to be 8 days old before you can take Meiser from them. But Reb Shimon, that our Mishnah is like Reb Shimon. Our Mishnah that says that the cutoff is the first of Tishrei, and you don't have to wait until it's a shlish, is like Reb Shimon. The Amr Reb Shimon, Mechusar Zman Nichnas Ladir Le'Saser, that already, that if it's less than 8 days old, it's not ready yet to be offered as a korban, you can already take Meiser Behema from it already. Come Reb Mana im Reb Shammai, but Reb Mana asked a kasha on Reb Shammai. He said, did you really say this? But Talmud Taninot, we have in that Mishnah that says, Benazeh Omer says, Benazeh Elulia Misasun La'atzman, that any animal born in Elul is tied separately. Lo afilu nolad hadesim v'tisha be'elul. Now, isn't that the entire Elul, including up to the 29th day as well? And if it's including the entire Elul, Islach Meimar Ben Azeh Reb Shimon v'lo Rabbanon. Are you going to say that Ben Azeh holds like Reb Shimon, that it's all entirely based on when the animal is born, and any animal born from the beginning until the end of Elul is going to be tied separately, even though it's not yet fit to be offered as a korban? So what, are you going to say that he holds like Reb Shimon and not like the rabbis? So Kamadat Omer al the Rabbanon. No, what you're going to say about the rabbis is Manichon L'shana Aba'a ben Misasun im b'nei Shnoson. No, what you can explain according to the rabbis is this: that yes, in order to offer it as a korban, and in order to separate it for Meiser, it would have to be 8 days old. That's true. However, the cutoff in terms of determining which year it's going to be, the flock of which year it's going to be tithed with is based on when it's born. And therefore, so Ki'ilu, if you have an animal born on the 1st of Tishrei, even though you can't yet separate it as Meiser, you have to wait 8 days, but nonetheless, it's going to be considered and going to have Meiser from all the other animals born in born in the coming year. And if it's born before the 1st of Tishrei, right? So even though in the previous year you would be unable to separate it, to take Meiser from it because it's not going to be old enough in the previous year. However, it is still tithed ultimately, 8 days later into the next year already, but it's going to be tithed with the flock from the previous year. So it's so what year you separate the Meiser from, which flock of which year is based on when the animal is born. However, lemaise, you're only going to take Meiser behema once it is already 8 days old. So Kenat Omer al Dvenazai, you're going to say the same thing about Ben Azai, that when he says that any animal born in Elul, you separate on its own, is Manichan Legoren Haba, Vein Misasun Bnei Elulim, that, you wait to separate them, to separate the Meiser until the next time you separate Meiser, i.e. once they're at least 8 days old. 8 days old, but in terms of which flock are you going to separate them with, it's going to be from the previous year, or in Ben Azai's case, Elul. Amr B'chia says, Zos Omeris, this says, Yom Sha'B'chor Mechusar Zman Bohen Olin Lo L'Soch Shana, so that when you have a B'chor, a firstborn, so when we count its first year, it even includes the first 8 days where you wouldn't be able to offer it as a korban. Amr Reb Mana, Amr Reb Yona, Abba Shama la minada, says Reb Mana, says Reb Yonah, that his father learned it from the following pasuk: Kol b'chor sheyivalid v'gomer, any animal that will be born as zachar takdish haketzed mishas leidaso atamona lo shana, that already from the time that it is born, you already count for the year. New Mishnah b'shalosh kupis shel shalosh sa'in torminas alishka, that in 3 boxes that each can hold 3 sa'ah, we take the tithe from the office that had the machzis shekel in it. V'chasuv alein aleph beis gimel, and on each one of the boxes there was the letter aleph on one, beis on the second, gimel on the third. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, says Rabbi Shmuel's Yevonis chasuv alein, that it was actually written in Greek letters, alpha, beis, gamma. In a Torah nichnas lo bepargod chafus, the person who goes in to take the coins doesn't go in with a clothing that has a hem, that nobody should suspect that he's like hiding any coins in the hem of his clothing. V'lo b'minov, v'lo b'sandal, not with shoes, not with sandals. V'lo b'tfilin, v'lo b'kamiyah, not with any kind of tefillin or amulet. Nothing that you should be able to think that maybe he's hiding coins somewhere. Shemiyani v'yomru me'avon alishka he'ani, lest that year he becomes poor and everybody says, oh, you know why he became poor? It's because he was being improper with the money from the lishka when he went in, right? Or maybe the opposite, he'll get very rich, and then all of a sudden everyone's saying, oh yeah, him, where do you think he got so rich from? He took some money when he went in to take the donations. So that a person needs to be fit before man, before other people, just like he needs to be fit before God. It's important also to not just to know that, well, I know I didn't do anything wrong, but you should also not want to set yourself up for people thinking that maybe you did do something wrong. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "V'yisim nekim Hashem u'miyisrael," that you should be clean not just from Hashem but also from Israel. V'omer, and the pasuk says, "U'matzachein v'seichatov b'nei Elokim v'adam," that he will find favor and good intellect in the eyes of man and God. Says the Gemara, Taman Taninam, we learned in a Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos, Mefanan afilu daled v'chomish kupis. You can move out on Shabbos even 4 or 5 boxes, in order to make space for people. Ibzeir shalas Rabbi Yoshia. So Ibzeir asked Rabbi Yoshia, Kamu shirun shel kupis. How large can these kupis be? How large can these boxes be that you're allowed to move around on Shabbos? Amrle, so Rabbi Yoshia says to Ibzeir, Nilmod sasum and amefarash. So let's learn something that is closed from something that's explained. Something that's cryptic from something that's explained, meaning while it might not be explicit how large these boxes can be, but there's another instance where we have boxes and it is explicit how large those boxes can be, so let's just apply that to this. The Tanya is we learned in the Brisa b'shalish kupis shalish sayin, that in 3 boxes, which are each 3 sa'ah, shein tisha sa'in, so 3 times 3 is 9, shein esim v'sheva sa'in, which is 27 sa'ah, because they would do the Trumas Halishka 3 times a year. Tormines Halishka. V'chasuv alein, Aleph Beis Gimel, and each one of the 3 boxes that they would use for Trumas Halishka would be marked. One had the letter Aleph, one had the letter Beis, one had the letter Gimel. Mipnei ma kasuv alein Aleph Beis Gimel. How come they were lettered? Lomar mistapik min harishona kodem l'shniya, min hashniya kodem l'shlishis, to say that first use the coins from the first box before starting to use the coins from the second box, and the third as well. Okay, the first box, then the second box, then the third box. So we want to say that just like by Trumas Halishka, the box holds 3 sa'ah, so also in terms of Hotzah Shabbos, in terms of Tircha Yisera on Shabbos, in terms of exerting yourself too much on Shabbos, so the amount of what would be considered acceptable would be up to 3 sa'ah, a box that is up to 3 sa'ah. Talmud Taninon, we learned Darton, Hamotziyayin Kidei Miziga Sakos. So somebody who takes out wine, remember this Masechta Shabbos, right? We saw all sorts of shiurim, right? In general, we said, right, the shiur for achila was kigrogris. So when it comes to wine, so we said Kidei Miziga Sakos, enough to dilute in a cup in wine, and that is a quarter of a revius, right? That if you have a quarter of a revius of undiluted wine, so then you'll add 3 parts to it, and then you will have a revius of diluted wine. So kidei miziga sakos, so ki'ilu, enough undiluted wine, so that you'll then dilute it and have a revius. Reb Ze'ir shal es Reb Yoshia kama shiuran shel kos. So Reb Ze'ir asked Reb Yoshia, so how large is this cup? So Amalei Nilmat Sasim and first. So he says, let's learn out where it doesn't say it explicitly from where it does say it explicitly. The Tanya, as we learn in Bryce, Reb Chia taught Arba Kosis Sha'amu Yeshtan Revius Shal Yain Ba'italki, that the Daled Kosis on Pesach at the Seder have a total of a revius of undiluted Italian wine, which means that each, right, so a revius divided into 4 cups would mean that each cup has a quarter of a revius of undiluted wine, which you then dilute it and you get a revius of wine, and it's the same equation on Shabbos. Amr Rabbi Yossi bar Oven Mishum Rabbi Yochanan to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so it says Rabbi Yossi bar Oven, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that this brisa, which says that the shear for a cup of wine is a revius, so it's Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, the Tanya, as we learn in a brisa, Kidei Gemia, that when it comes to mayim Kidei Gemia, that when it comes to taking out water on Shabbos, it's enough water for a swallow. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kidei Lashu B'Enes Akilor, enough water that you would apply to an eye salve. All right. Yain Kidei Gemia, how much wine do you take out on Shabbos in your chayev? So enough to swallow. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kidei Miziga Sakos, enough undiluted wine, so you'll mix it together with water and dilute it to be a revius of wine, and that is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So therefore, the previous brisa or opinion that says that it's miziga sakos, so that's Rabbi Yehuda. Mozug bechama. So now, what if you have a diluted cup of wine? How much do you take out? We said undiluted, it's a quarter of a revius. What about when it's diluted? So nishma'ina minada. So let's learn it from the following: Ma'im kidei gemia, as the brisa that we just quoted, that when you take out water on Shabbos, it's enough to swallow, you'll be chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kidei lashuk b'enes akilor, enough water that you'd put on an eye salve. What's an eye salve? Yain kidei gamia, and wine, in order, you'd be chayiv if you take out enough that you could swallow it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kidei miziga sakos, Rabbi Yehuda says enough wine that you would then dilute it with water. Hada amra mazug kidei miziga sakos. Fine. So how much? So even if it's diluted, it would be the same equation. So if we have a quarter of a revius of undiluted wine, so then the amount of diluted wine that you'd be chayav for is basically, if you dilute it with water, and now you have a revius. Basically, you add 3 parts water to the wine. Now you have a revius, so that's the shear that we're talking about. So undiluted, it's a quarter of a revius, right? And as we've seen a few times in the name of Rava, that any wine that doesn't require you to add 3 parts water to it in order to dilute it properly is not considered proper wine. So undiluted, a quarter of a revius; diluted, a revius. Kamashiurin shalkos. How large is this cup? Reb Oven Omar titarmon v'revia. Okay, says Reb Oven, it's a titarmon and a quarter. Ma'u l'shtosim b'kerech echad. 1 second. So we are now talking about the cups of wine at the Seder, right? How large do these glasses of wine at the Seder have to be? So it's a titarton and a revia. Now, can you drink all 4 cups of wine at the Seder all at once? Now, we had seen this Gemara in Masechta Pesachim, in Arvei Pesachim, we said, no, you cannot. I think we said, Yidei Yain Yotza, Yidei Kosis Lo Yotza, something like that. So here we're saying, with the Amr of Mana, Amr Rav Yossi, Halal, and Shimon, B'Beis HaKnesses Yotza, from the fact that Rav Mana says the name of Rav Yossi, that if you hear Halal in the Beis HaKnesses in Shul, if in the synagogue on Pesach night, on the first night of Pesach, you hear Halal in Shul, and I think that Lamaisa, the minig is to say Halal in Shul on the first night of Pesach. Yotza. So your Yotze, you don't have to say Halal now at the Seder. So if that's the case, Hado Amra, Im Shasan B'Kerech Echad Yotza. So this says that if you eat it, that if you drink the wine all at once, you taka Yotze. Because we're saying that if you went to Shul at night on Pesach and you heard Halal, so you don't have to say it at the Seder. Well, if that's the case, then you're going straight from cup 3 to cup 4 without saying Halal in the middle. And we're saying that that's okay. So just like between 3 and 4, apparently you could have one right after the other. So then also between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, you can also just, drink all the cups all at once, and that should be fine. But again, remember in Arvei Pesachim we said that wouldn't be okay. Can you drink the wine in like sips, or do you have to drink it all at once? All we said is that you should drink the wine. We didn't say that you should get drunk. And if you drink the wine slowly, so you won't get drunk, so that's acceptable. Yes, you could sip your wine. Can you use Shemitah wine for the Seder? Yes, certainly. You can use Shemitah wine. There's no problem with that. Can you use konditin, which is some kind of spiced wine? Well, from the fact that Bar Kapara says that konditin is wine, so you could be yotze with konditin. Can you use diluted wine? Okay, I mean, mistama in general, wine is considered diluted wine, but miditani Reb Chia, I bought koses sha'amru yotzin ben chayin ben mezugin uvad sheiboim tam umar yain. So the Gemara says, well, Reb Chia says that the 4 cups of wine they drink at the Seder, whether chayin ben mezugin, whether they're undiluted, whether they are diluted, uvad sheiboim tam umar yain, as long as they taste and look like wine. On Rabbi Yirmiyah mitzvah lotzos b'yayin odom, says Rabbi Yirmiyah that it's taka preferable to use red wine. We saw this also in Masechta Pesachim, in Arvei Pesachim. Shneimar, the Apostle says, Altera yayin ki is adam ki yitim because eino v'gomer. That don't, fear wine because it's red. And he'll put his eye towards his glass. We see yayin ki is adam, that wine is red. Tani mivushal ki mesubal. They say that cooked wine is like spiced wine. Ma'ulot says b'yayin mevushal. Can you use cooked wine? Or Rabbi Yonah yotzim b'yayin mevushal. Rabbi Yonah says, yeah, you could use cooked wine for the Seder. Rabbi Yonah at the time, Rabbi Yonah is consistent with his reasoning. The Rabbi Yonah karavashosi arba kasid the fischa, because Rabbi Yonah, when he would drink the daled kosis on Pesach night at the Seder, have a chozik reisha ad chaga. He would have a headache until Shavuos. Wow. Rabbi Yonah, he would drink the arba kosis at the Seder, and then he'd have a headache until Shavuos time for 7 weeks. So therefore, apparently, in order to make the wine less potent, cooking it would make it less potent, and Rabbi Yonah would prefer to cook the wine so that it would help with the headaches. Chada, where am I? Chamise chada matronisa apui nihirin. So apparently there was a woman who saw Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, and his face was very radiant. It's very cool because I always feel like we don't see too much about Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai. We see things about Reb Shimon, Reb Meir, Reb Yossi. I feel like Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, we don't know too much about him. The last thing that comes to mind is in Masechta Shabbos, when we said in Bameh Madlikin that when Shabbos came in, Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai would wrap himself in his talis and he would be like an angel. That's the last time I remember hearing about Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai. So here's a story with Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, that a certain woman saw him and his face was very radiant. Omer, she said, Sava, Sava, old man, Chadamean itlas milen izbach. Certainly one of the following three scenarios must be true. O de shasui chamra, either you're drunk, o de malvi bribis at, or you are somebody who lends with interest, or de megadle chazire at, or you raise pigs. That must be the explanation for your radiance. Amalei tifach rucha da'ayi itza. So Rabbi Yehuda says, may the spirit of this woman become bloated, or something like that. The chadame ilain plus milaya lesbi, because none of those statements are true. None of those options are true. Ela upani shchiach li. Rather, it's my learning that is available to me, and that is what makes my face radiant. Because the pasuk says in Koheles, Chochmas Adam Taripanav, that the wisdom of man will make his face radiate. Rabbi Abba, another story about somebody's face radiating from his learning. That Rabbi Abba visited Tiberia, Chamuni Talmidoi de Reb Yochanan Apui Nehorin. And the students of Reb Yochanan noticed that Rabbi Abba's face was very, very radiant. Amarun Talmidim de Reb Yochanan, so the students told Reb Yochanan, Ashkach Rabbi Abba Sima, that Rabbi Abba must have found the treasure, and that's why his face is so radiant. Also Legabe, so Rabbi Yochanan came out, Amarle Maya Raisa Chadata Shamat. So Rabbi Yochanan obviously knew what the real reason was, and he says to Rabbi Abba, what great teaching did you learn? Amarle Tosefta Atika Kara. Amarle Tosefta Atika. He says, Taka, a very old Tosefta. And that's why his face was so radiant, because he learned an old Tosefta. Kara Ale Chochmas Adam Taripanav. So Rabbi Yochanan said about Rabbi Abba that the wisdom of man makes his face shine. Should we stop here? No, let's go a shtickle weiter. Amr Reb Chanan, says Reb Chanan, Loga de Oraisa Tumunsa Atika de Muryisa de Tzipori. Alright. So the log, the Oraisa log, okay, and we learned this in Mr. Arvi Pesachim as well, right? That the Oraisa log is this old tmunsa that they would use to measure fish fats in Tzipori. Alright. Rabbi Yonah says, Rabbi Yonah, b'chachmona la, and I remember, Teves Rabbi Yanai have a mechilin badvash. I remember that in the house of Rabbi Yanai, they would use this measure for honey. Tani, they was taught chatzi shminis tvarnis hayishana, that it's half of the Tiberius old shminis. That's the revius. Alright. Rabbi Yochanan, hadein didanu. Rabbi Yochanan says, that's taka the same shminis that we have nowadays. If that's the case, then why do we call it the old one if it's the same one that we have now? Man begin to have a biyome. Well, because it changed during that time. What's this aleph? What does it change it to? V'lo makari le atika. Man begin to have a biyome zeira v'rabsa v'izaris kama dahava. Okay. Okay. The is the amr the is ira velo is ira kama de havas. What? I don't know. Basically, some weird girsa there, but the idea is that Rabbi Yochanan is saying that in his day it's really the same as it was originally, but in the interim it like became bigger, and that's why he was saying that's why the Brisa referred to it as the old one, because at that point it was like a different size. It became bigger or it became smaller, whatever it is, but already in Rabbi Yochanan's day it was the same size as how it was. Kama shir hu shir shel kos. What is the size of a cup that can hold a revius? This also we saw in Avei Pesachim. Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Yossi bar Pazi ben Pazi, Rabbi Yossi bar Bivi b'shem Rabbi Shmuel etzba'im al etzba'im al rum etzba v'mechzel u'shlish etzba, that it's 2 finger breadths by 2 finger breadths at a height of 1.5 1/3 finger breadths. All right, well, that was Daf Ches of Masechta Sheqalim. I hope that you enjoyed. But we started the Gemara on the 3rd parak of Sheqalim. I don't know if I said Pesachim, but I certainly meant Sheqalim. We started off going weiter in terms of Meiser Behema and when the cutoff is in terms of Meiser Behema, and then we moved into some interesting discussions about wine. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.